Well, good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the Semper Fi Fund Apprenticeship Program weekly Zoom meetings. We host these roughly every week with various topics that our apprentices, our business owners, or those that are pursuing a career have an interest in learning more about. A lot of new faces, a lot of staff from all over our department. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Casey Fisher. I am an advisor in the apprenticeship program. And from our staff, we also have Brooke Clearnan, BJ Leggett, Mike McCabe, and Mike Harris. Our other two staff members will not be able to join us today, and we're not going to introduce everybody on the call because we have a speaker that we want to maximize our time with today. So if you do have a question, as a reminder, just use the chat function on your right or raise your hand and we can unmute you if it's something specific that takes more than typing the question in. So today, it is an honor for me to introduce Eric Smith, an Army Colonel, retired, and PhD. Eric has an extensive military background and career, as you saw from the bio that I sent out. He also holds many degrees, many more than me, which is why we have him on this show today. His latest was a PhD in political science from Auburn, and I was going to give him a hard time, but he's actually an Alabama fan, so we have become more bonded through that, which is beautiful. However, the reason why we have him on the call is because of his work with the Ramsey Solutions Group. So if you don't know who Dave Ramsey is or didn't click on any of the links that I sent, do so and educate yourself on what the Dave Ramsey Group does. He started that work in October of 2012, where he specifically advises military and veteran groups like ours. And he's done some pretty cool stuff with active duty service members as they make a transition. So Colonel, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Casey. I appreciate it. Pleasure to be here. And I realize that I'm surrounded mostly by folks with a Marine background. My family is mostly Army. I come from a long legacy of that, but I do have a nephew that is in Parris Island right now going through boot camp. So we're expanding our view to include the Marines within our family.
Kind of the way you expanded your view of Tennessee, Georgia, Auburn, and then you just took on Alabama when your daughters went there.
Well, when you have kids go to a school, you get this financial attachment to it, and so that really helps to pave the way for your loyalties as well.
I love it. Well, speaking of the financial attachment, that's what we're here to talk about. We've got a bit of an agenda, but I want you to kind of take a few minutes, talk a little bit about your background in finance and budgeting, and as well as your career so far with the Ramsey Group.
Sure. Happy to. Like I said, I come from a long family of military folks. Grandfather served, a couple of uncles. My father was career military. I grew up as a military brat. So in the 60s and 70s, we bounced all around the United States. I joined the military as soon as I graduated from college. I was commissioned the same day I got my diploma from college. I served for 28 years on active duty. I was a helicopter pilot. I was also an aircraft maintenance officer. I did some experimental type work and also did some force structure type work. The career that I had in the military with being in aviation maintenance type units kept me in troop units. So I was real close to the soldiers. And as a matter of fact, I spent most of my time in troop type units. I then left the military, retired from the military, went to work for Dave while I was still on terminal leave, and joined his military team. At the time I joined, we had I think there were 3 Air Force folks, a Navy reservist, and they wanted somebody who could kind of drag their knuckles on the ground to round it out and be able to talk to the Army and the Marines. And so I got hired for the job. So it's been a really good gig. Enjoyed it. We do work with all of the military branches right now, to include the reserves and the National Guard. And Casey mentioned veterans organizations. There's several of them that we're engaged with as well. And for quite a while, we also worked with law enforcement, first responders, but that's kind of moved on to another team. So I'm focused solely on military and veteran type organizations.
Great. And it's great that you're here with us. I know you've actually worked with a couple of our case managers in different parts of the country and getting them some materials to help with the veterans that we serve on a daily basis. So thank you for that. You know, with Dave Ramsey and most of what y'all talk about and the mission that you have is remove debt, live a life that's free from being owed to anyone, and saving money. And one of the things in our apprenticeship program that we try to coach or advise or promote is the concept of putting money away, budgeting. How do I take my $4,000 in revenue every month and budget some of that? But what I run into, and not just in this population, but anywhere I go, why is it that finance and budgeting is such a touchy subject and people shy away from it, almost go, I don't even want to deal with it? What, in your opinion, makes people do that?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. It's kind of a murky topic because you can drown in the numbers part of it pretty quick. And so there are a lot of people with a lot of degrees and a lot of letters after their name that are involved in this, and they like to talk about all sorts of finance related terms that nobody seems to really care much about. So they do, but nobody else does, because it's kind of hard to keep up with all of it. So it can be a bit murky. It can also be people don't like talking about this because it's boring for some people. It just doesn't seem to have a whole lot of life to it. For other people, it's a very emotional topic. Depending upon your background, the circumstances where you came from, money may have been used as a way to manipulate or control, and so there's an emotional part of it. And I'll just share with you, and I think it's common knowledge that the biggest reason that couples are fighting is usually has something to do with money. And so it can be a topic that is just painful to talk about as well. So a lot of reasons why in there. And usually when I'm talking to somebody about personal finances, we like to try and see if we can figure out what those issues are, what those challenges are. And because that usually by knowing that, it helps us, continue the conversation.
Sure. And you and I had talked a couple times, and I've mentioned this to other people, and it's always a part of, I guess, this conversation or any sort of business, is you have to have a plan. And when you break it down to a financial side, it's a budget. That's really what a plan is. And everybody, like Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, but you still have the fundamentals of finance, which one of the questions that was brought up before this and that our service members wanted to ask is, how do you establish a working budget if you don't know, what percentage I should put away for certain things? How can I establish a working budget if I just don't know what I don't know?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of general rules that we say will make you successful with your money. And first of all, if you live on less than you earn, and second of all, if you have a plan, and a budget is usually part of that plan. If you live by those two principles, then by definition, you're going to be more than likely successful with your money. But the budget part and the percentages, there's a lot of wisdom that goes into that kind of discussion. We say, for a personal budget, your mortgage shouldn't be more than 25% of your take-home income. Just as a rule of thumb. If it's more than that, we probably need to be looking for some way to see if we can reduce that. So 25% for the mortgage is one rule of thumb that we discuss quite frequently. Another one is that we talk about putting away 15% of your take-home income towards retirement. Again, you don't begin that right away. That would be a little bit later in the budgeting process. So those are a couple of percentages there. That I would share with you. Depending upon the kind of business or the household that you have, the other percentages could change. The amount of money that you spend on food, or again, if we're talking about a business, whether you're one that relies heavily on equipment that requires a lot of maintenance, those percentages can change. So there's quite a few variables in there. We would probably need to actually sit down and talk through the specifics of the circumstance to really break out those percentages.
Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of what we try to do. And it just does become daunting for an individual or a family, and the pressure that it takes to put money away and save and pay the bills, et cetera. So when we take the personal budget and we go into a business, sometimes it can be a little more oversimplified. Well, we just have to sell a product for more than we make it. Well, not if you have a lien on a property that you own, or if you leverage the equipment that's manufacturing the t-shirts or whatever. So it's kind of seems like, and one of the things we always talk about is pillars in a business. And one of the foundations that holds that business up, and really kind of the main one that does get forgotten, is finance. And savings is a big deal. I asked you this question when we spoke initially last week, and it how much of revenue, generally speaking, I know it depends on so many factors, but if you were to just answer this question, how much of net, I guess, gross revenue should a business be putting away just as a rainy day savings? And this is leading into a bigger conversation that we'll have as we go, but that's the question.
Well, again, a lot of variables on that one. If we're talking about a family, that's probably it's probably a lot easier to narrow this down if we talk about the family, because a business could be anything from a very small business with just one employee all the way up to something quite a bit bigger. And so, there are a lot of variables that are built into that. But from an individual perspective, and if this individual just has his own little business, we would say that you're going to start with something small, like about $1,000. Have that away for that rainy day, that emergency fund, until we can make some progress with paying off some debt. And then once we've got that debt paid off, we want to blow that emergency fund up into, we say, 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And again, that's going to vary from individual to individual, because what it costs me to live for 3 to 6 months would be different than probably everybody that's on this call. So I'd have to sit down with a pen and paper and figure out what that is. But we want that pile of cash sitting there. We often get into a discussion about that emergency fund. People go, well, that's a great way for me to invest it and make some money. And we tell you, don't consider that to be an investment. It's more of an insurance policy. It is there so that when the inevitable crisis occurs, and if we look around right now and see all the crises that are occurring around the United States, we got wildfires out west, we got hurricanes that have blown through the southeast. We've got a pandemic sitting on top of us right now. You name it, there's some sort of emergency that's probably impacting everybody here. And so you need to have that money sitting there to cover you, so that when that inevitable circumstance comes about, you can get through it without having to borrow a bunch of money. Because we know if you have to borrow a bunch of money, then you're going to have to pay it back. And in the meantime, you're going to be paying interest, which is just, as a business owner, interest on loans is just sapping your profits. And that can really break your back if you're not careful. And people come back and they'll say, well, okay, if I have a little crisis like a hurricane come through, well, insurance will cover me. Well, sometimes it takes the insurance company a while to catch up. So if we've got the money sitting there, we can kind of keep things going for a while. We can at least survive. And that's why that emergency fund is just so incredibly important. So 3 to 6 months of operating expenses for a small budget would probably be, for a small company, would be a very good rule of thumb. Now, for a larger company, that's a lot of money. So you're going to have to temper that. But again, the purpose in that is to get you through the crisis so that you don't, when you get knocked back on your heels, it allows you to kind of continue moving forward, even though, some bad things have happened.
Sure. So the theory being, let's save, let's stay away from interest-bearing debt. Do you have an example of maybe an individual that you've helped or a family that you've helped get out of debt, or plan for your baby step number one is, let's save $1,000? Mm-hmm. Do you have a personal example? And then the second part of that question is, do you have an example of a business that maybe you've been a part of or through Ramsey has helped with your solutions, that has gotten themselves out of debt, been able to put 3 to 6 months away, and are now growing in a different direction?
Sure. Yeah, my focus with my team is mostly on the personal side. And so I've got 8 years worth of examples of folks that have used our program and have seen tremendous success along the way. It's very common. And let me just say that, we offer a program, and people say, what's the return on investment? How do I know that that's really going to work? And our program is a version of Financial Peace University. It lasts 9 weeks. The typical person going through the program, from the start of the program to the graduation, has an $8,000 change in their life. And that $8,000 change is defined as a combination of paying off debt and putting savings in place, savings for an emergency and getting rid of the debt. So, while it costs about $80 to go through, and this is the selling point, if it costs $80 to go through the course, you got an $8,000 change in your life. Well, that's a 100-fold return on investment. Pretty good deal. And to get back to your question about success stories, that's the average, that $8,000 that we have seen at a Special Forces unit out of Fort Bragg, and they love the program because their lifestyle is filled with deployments and family separations, and there's just a whole host of problems associated with it. And everybody on the call knows this because they've all been deployed more than likely. But they saw an average of $15,000 change per average family in this course of about 13 families. So huge progress that they made. So, but yeah, what our program consists of is 7 steps. And the first step, as we mentioned, is we want you to pull together $1,000. And if you're earning less than 20 grand, we're going to knock it down to $500. But $1,000 for most of us. Get that in a savings account, get it someplace where it's accessible. And once you've got that in place, now we can start tackling the debts and the consumer debts, car payments, credit card debts, student loans, payday loans, anything like that. We want to begin paying those off. And we've got a systematic process that we use to pay those off quickly. We don't believe in debt management. We believe in killing debt. Put your crosshairs on it and pull the trigger, get rid of it, and it's gone. Once that debt is gone, that consumer debt, all debt except for the mortgage, now we're going to take that $1,000 emergency fund and we're going to blow it up into that 3 to 6 months of savings. New emergency fund, 3 to 6 months sitting there. And if you think about it, if I could get everybody in the military, and if I could get everybody on this call right now to that point where they don't have any consumer debt, no debt whatsoever other than a mortgage, and they're sitting on a pile of cash that they could live on for 3 to 6 months, if that's not peace of mind, then I don't know what it is. That's worth an awful lot right there. If I could get, every commander I talk to in the military just says, yeah, that'd be wonderful. I could get all my guys to that point, so we want them to get to that point, and then we start talking about saving for retirement. We start talking about saving for, kids' post-high school education. And I don't say college because not everybody needs to go to college. There's trade schools and stuff like that. But if you're interested in, helping your kids get through, get some sort of certification beyond high school, then this is the point where we want to start doing that. Eventually, we want to pay off the house. Once you're at that point where you've got the house paid off, you got the kids' post-high school savings in place, you got all the debt paid off, you're sitting on this pile of cash, and you're saving for your retirement, you're going to be accumulating a lot of cash. And we say at that point in time, you can just give it away or save it or do whatever you need to do with it. But that's kind of that's in a very short, fast discussion in a nutshell. What our beliefs are on this. But
Yeah.
and if I could throw one more thing in there, and I know as business folks, there's a huge probably enticement, a lot of persuasion out there by others to borrow money to get things started. And there's an old adage, you got to spend money to earn money, and be very careful with that, because again, that borrowed money has that little thing called interest that where you're putting steak on the banker's dinner plate in the evenings. And I don't like bankers personally. No offense if there's any on the call, but they're good folks. I just don't want to give them steak. Let them go earn their own money, but not for me. So let's try to avoid spending the money, or borrowing money. I'm sorry. So we want to make very wise decisions. And as a business person, and this kind of gets Casey back to your discussion on the budget. There's probably a lot of enticement to expand the business. Let's be careful with that. We may need to expand, but let's kind of stay close to our core competency that we have. And we here at Ramsey Solutions, we're a very big, diverse business. And there have been times when we've kind of gotten outside of our core competency, the things that what we're really good at, what we're known for. In our case, it's personal finance. and we kind of branch into high school personal finance, military, church, just in general, and then some associated things with that. That's our core competency, and that's how we define ourselves. To go beyond that, if we decided to get into a car dealership, that would, that would be enticing. We all like cars, but we don't need to do that because it's outside of our core competency. And if we're going to go into that, something that's really diverse like that, we're going to go very slow and very methodical on that because we want to make sure that we're not just leaping into something too quick. So expansions in a business, changes in a business need to be very, very slow, very well thought out.
Well said. And it's interesting because when we talk about this, I can hear myself say, yeah, but you don't know my situation. Or somebody else may say, you don't know what our family's dealing with, or you don't know. And a lot of the times there's obviously life things that happen, but a theme that keeps coming up in kind of what you're talking about, there's an underlying current that it takes to do what you're doing or to follow these steps, and it's discipline. So don't go out to eat every night. Don't buy the new sweatshirt. I actually heard Dave Ramsey, he didn't say this, he was yelling it on one of his podcasts. Best Buy doesn't need your money. The CD, the TV, the thing is not going to help you get out of debt. In fact, it's going to put you further in because of your credit card debt. So the question is, it's kind of it's a toss up, and I don't know if there's a right answer, but is discipline something that can be learned, or is it mostly inherited in our DNA?
And I'm talking to a military crowd, so discipline is a term that they know very well, and they understand it better than a lot of the civilians that I work with, to be very honest with you. Discipline to them is a bad thing. Military understands the need for it. Yeah, it is. I wouldn't say it's you're born with it. I think it's something that you learn, and you can certainly become undisciplined and then become redisciplined over time. So, and again, the military folks, they're really into this, and they know it's doing the same things over and over again and doing them correctly. Go slow, get there faster. Along with discipline, and this is part of why we got such a crisis in in America with personal finances is, folks, and again, this is my history of bringing this program into the military, and I see this repeated over and over again. It doesn't matter which service we're talking about either. New recruits coming into the military, they should have learned to do this, their personal finances at home. Well, most of the time their parents are in bad shape too. So, maybe they didn't have a real good example there. Well, they should have learned it in high school. Well, most of the states don't have stringent requirements for teaching personal finance in high school. It's getting better. It's a lot better than it was when I first started here, but it's still lacking in a lot of areas. So, so maybe they should have learned it through a program like Financial Peace when they went to church. Well, a lot of people don't go to church either. So, so we've missed all those opportunities, and these folks, they pour into the military with probably no experience or education in this, and then they jump right into the military. It may be their first real job, where they're getting a real paycheck, and everybody on the call today will recognize this. Right outside, every major military base, Pickett, Camp Lejeune, Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, wherever, San Diego, there's going to be 3 miles of stupid right outside the front gate. Pawn shops, porn shops, tow to note, rent to own, used car lots. It's all right out there. So folks that are ill prepared to manage their funds, most of them live off base. They go in and out of that same gate onto the base, twice a day. And they kind of get immune to it, and maybe they stop in there once and then they go back again, and next thing you know, we have folks that are using payday lenders like they do their ATM card, which is really, really bad. So and Casey, this is getting back to your comment about discipline. We've got to first start with some education on this. We have got to, we got to debunk some myths that are out there. You're always going to have a car payment. That's one myth that we like to make fun of and pick at here. You don't always have to have a car payment. It's not necessary. You can get by without having one. So we need to debunk the myths, and we need to share appropriate and proper principles for managing funds. And then we need to reinforce it over and over again. That's why Marines go to the rifle range, not once in their career, but they go every year, 2 times a year in some cases, depending on what your MOS is. So you have to keep going back, and you have to keep practicing and practicing and practicing. That's the definition of discipline. And I find with the military, they get this faster than anybody else does. They get it because they're used to it.
Definitely, definitely. One thing that we are confronted with constantly, and you've touched on it a little bit, is growth and expansion in a business. And sometimes that's the principles probably still apply in a personal or family financial situation. But you have a service member, you have a business owner that wants to expand, but it's going to take debt. It's $100,000 in investment in equipment. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into that. But my question that you can look at the Ramsey model, and then you can look at the rich dad poor dad model, and he thinks there's good debt versus bad debt, and I'm a hybrid of both, but I want to kind of get your thoughts on the concept of good debt and what that means, and what bad debt is and what that means.
Sure. We talk about credit cards. Is it a sin to have a credit card? No. Having a credit card and using a credit card, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. The problem comes into the use of a credit card when you don't pay the balance off and you let it ride for a month, and maybe you let it ride for another month. And I learned this in my life. When Dave he wasn't around doing his thing when I was a lieutenant in the Army and a captain. I kind of learned a lot of this on my own, but I just sat down with my credit card statement one month and said, okay, this is the amount of interest I'm paying for this month times 12. Wow, that's a lot of money that I'm putting in, Visa or MasterCard or whoever's pocket for the whole year that I'm using this thing. It was a lot of money. I said, I'm not going to do that. So debt can become bad when it becomes excessive, and it can really become bad when you have so much of it that you end up having to prioritize paying off your debt versus maybe some of the essential things that you need in your family, feeding your family or something like that. Debt can become a real problem, and service members get this. You get too much debt, and that security clearance that you have can be, when you have to renew it, it may not be renewed just because you have too much debt and you're considered to be a bit risky. And that's the number one reason that folks don't get their security clearance renewed, is because of debt. So we like to say, kind of treat it like a pet rattlesnake. If you got one, don't. First of all, I wouldn't recommend having a pet rattlesnake, but if you do, you better be real careful with that thing, because it's going to bite you the first chance it gets. You can talk nice to it and all that, but it can be very mean. So just be careful with it. So why mess around with something like that can hurt you? Why not? There are other ways to spend your money. We recommend debit cards in lieu of a credit card. Again, hooked to a bank account, and it's just as safe as a credit card. It will do everything that a credit card will do. And some people go, well, you can't get a rental car with it. Well, the rental car companies are starting to come around on this now too. So you can use a debit card to do everything that you use a credit card for. It's just as safe, it's just as secure, just like a credit card is. So why not use that instead? And it's a lot safer way to do it.
Sure.
But yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I think, for us, we have a couple of specific, at least I have a few specific business owners that have opportunity. So there's that old saying of, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And this is where being a business owner, an entrepreneur, the forward thinking, the planning, the understanding the market, and all of these factors that contribute into making decisions for your employees, for yourself, for your future come into play. Because if I have to take out a $100,000 note to gain access to this opportunity, which isn't a guarantee, and the only thing that is death and taxes. So at some point, and we can go way down a road here, but there is good debt, is kind of what I'm hearing. Is there is, but it takes a lot of planning and a lot of thinking it through and understanding how quickly can I pay this off and get my return for my future. Because as a business owner, you have a responsibility. And that responsibility starts with you, then your family, then your community and your customers, on and on.
Well,
But if you,
Casey,
yeah,
Casey, can I interrupt you real quick?
please.
Um, we all start somewhere as a business owner, as a family person, something like that. You know, maybe we've got debt now. Why not make it a goal of the business to be debt free and operate without any debt whatsoever? You know, is that a possibility? Why not make that a major goal of the organization? And I got to circle back on this good debt, bad debt. You know, if you've ever been around somebody that was part of the Depression era, my grandfather, I was around him some. He was a survivor of the Depression, and he had a different view on debt than a lot of people do. You know, he was a farmer. He also worked in a textile factory as a machinist, and so he would borrow a little money to buy a tractor or buy a tract of land so that he could farm it, but he never borrowed the whole amount. It was only a portion of it. He had savings to cover it, and it's what he couldn't cover with his savings is what he would borrow. So he kept that as small as he could, and he would pay it off as fast as he possibly could, you know, get rid of it. And the other interesting thing to me that, and this is very different than today's society, he he was kind of embarrassed by having debt. You know, to him that just wasn't a good thing. You know, so I think he kind of got it, that it's having debt. You know, if you have a little bit, well, let's get rid of it as fast as we can. Okay. You know, I mean, I bought many cars in my lifetime. I think I've owned over 35 of them, and I borrowed some money, but I never borrowed the full amount on the car. I would borrow only a portion when I didn't have, you know, I would put some money down on it, and then I would borrow a little bit more. And I never ever went the full term on the note. I always paid it off early, you know. So if you have the debt, let's try to figure out how to get rid of it, and let's try to figure out how to learn to operate without it if we can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And one last thing, you got
Please,
me going
please.
on this now. If you have debt, you're now being controlled by somebody else. You've given up a portion of control of your life, of your business, of your family to somebody else, you know, because you have, you know, and if you don't believe me, then don't make the payment 1 month and see what happens, you know. So you have given up some control. I like to be in control. I'm a bit of a control freak. So I as much as I can, I want to be able to control my surroundings. I don't want bankers involved in my life. I don't want the government involved in my life as much as possible. I know I need a little bit of them, and I'm going on a tangent here, but to the greatest extent possible, I want all of them out of my life so I can do my thing.
Your doctorate in political science is coming out.
Yeah, it's a life story, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I think that's too that kind of plays to our society as a whole too. Is we live in a microwave world, but a lot of the times it takes a crock pot to get the delicious meal, and to grow a business, to be a good, solid, healthy, successful business, it takes time. And if that means not
Sure.
taking on debt so that it can be healthier when a pandemic happens again, or when the next big thing shuts down the economy, whenever that will be, or whatever it will be, you're prepared and you're not owed to anyone. You can take a pay cut at the top level to keep your lower level employees around. I think that was something that I listened to one of Dave's podcasts at the very beginning, and he said, from the top three levels, we will not take a paycheck before we will not take a paycheck if it means keeping people on. We won't let people go, and that
Right.
was inspiring. Yeah.
Well, as I was, you know, thinking about this call, this session, I was trying to think again, because I don't want to, you know, dictate or preach to folks that are running businesses how to do this, because you know they've got a lot more experience this than I do. I'm just here to serve as a coach and an advisor on this, and maybe, you know, share an outsider's perspective. But you know, I was just thinking rental property seems to be what a lot of folks try to get into. And if you're an owner of rental property, and you've got that property mortgaged, in other words, you got a loan against it, well, now a big portion of your income goes out to the bank in the form of interest. And I share this story because my father-in-law he owned a bunch of rental properties, and you know, have a little downturn in the economy, and your renters all of a sudden start coming up with some tough life stories, and you know, can't make their rent payment. You know, evicting people from the house is not that easy, depending upon the state. You know, and it's kind of cold-hearted to throw somebody out just because they're down on their luck. So next thing I know, he's carrying people from month to month and not making them pay the rent. Well, the bank's still charging him the interest on the loans. That can't stop. So, you know, he's just having to suck it up, and that's a tough thing. So if you're going to be in the rental market or in the rental business, maybe as quick as you can, you get rid of those mortgages, you know, and maybe it's just one by one systematically get rid of them so that you own the house. Now, downturn economy, and if you want to extend some grace to somebody and let them ride for a month or two because they're down on their luck, well, it doesn't kill you in the process of doing that. I watched my parents-in-law almost go broke, and they're retirees, by the way, on a fixed income because of rental houses and having all these mortgages there. It was just a really sad situation. So again, you got me going on the debt thing, and I just say as quick as you can, let's try to get rid of that if possible.
Yeah, it's a different business model. It's a different approach to
Sure.
a bigger bottom line. Let me pay off the
Right.
debt quicker than pay myself more this month. And
Right.
it really is that the concept of paying down debt, not being owed to anyone, allows you the freedom to make maybe potentially a better, bigger decision later. I do have a couple of questions. They were more
Okay.
specifically to, and I'm not sure if you can see them, but they're more towards savings. So the question is, how would you contribute savings with inflation rates for potential / business growth? And I know, and before you answer, I want to make sure everybody knows when I talked to Eric, he said, well, I can't really answer any CPA questions or like investment type questions because that's not legally, he's not bound to do that. So with that being said, what will be your response?
Savings, again, putting money aside for this, for emergencies, and putting money aside for future purchases of, if we're talking about a business for equipment, or if we're in the rental business, houses, something like that. That seems to me the big thought on the putting the money away in savings. To me, more is better, but is there a certain percentage of that? You know, that's going to be up to the business. I would have to see some numbers on that. And as you said so eloquently, Casey, I'm not a tax guy. I don't offer investments or insurance either.
So we did have another question. It might just be worth talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you can give a specific answer, but I have a question. The individual says, I have a question on the infinity banking concept, opinion and recommendation, specifically using a whole life insurance policy to create your own bank and use it as such. So I already know what you're going to say about the policy, but I wanted to at least throw it out there to see where this goes.
I'm not at liberty to talk about companies like that. I will tell you, we don't suggest whole life insurance of any kind. We like term life insurance. Everybody on this call, if you used SGLI when you were in the military, you were using term insurance. We like it because it's cheap. You don't have to deal with salespeople, which is nice, and the unit manages it for you. But we like the term insurance. I really don't feel comfortable getting into a discussion on investing whole life policies or using that as collateral with banks and stuff. That's kind of beyond my that's beyond my area.
Yeah, I've read a couple of books about this, and by the time I was probably reading it, the laws changed or shifted enough that it was kind of irrelevant. And by the time that I would be able to move on it, it wasn't going to make sense for me anyway. So I guess the recommendation is get a good financial advisor if you're going to go down that road, if it's something that you can't educate yourself on well enough. But even then, you're paying that person for some of that stuff. So if you get to those stages of no debt, et cetera, that's kind of the process.
Hey, and Casey, a great point on that too. A financial advisor. If you've got one, know how they get paid. How are they compensated? You know, if they sell mutual funds and insurance, and they just happen to be your financial advisor, well, they get paid to sell you mutual funds and insurance. You might not get quite as much financial advice as you will mutual fund and insurance advice. I mean, how many folks have ever talked to an insurance agent that said, "Oh, you got too much insurance. Let's sell some of that. Let's cash some of that in." You know, said nobody ever. Um, if you can get a financial advisor who's compensated for being a financial advisor, that may be a game changer right there. So look to see where they're getting paid, because that can that may taint the advice that you get from them. And I'm not saying, everybody that's, in Edward Jones or Merrill Lynch or bad folks at all. I'm just saying, look to see what motivates them. How are they compensated?
Yeah, definitely. And I answered this question in the chat box because I know Dave promotes the Every Dollar app, but I recommend a specific financial accounting program. Whoops, it moved on me there. Or app to track business cash flow and expenditures. I put the Every Dollar app because it's the personal way.
Yes, sir.
So what would you say? Do you have a business side, business app or function?
Again, if we're talking about a really small business, like a home business, something like that, every dollar is probably going to be just fine. If we're starting to get into something bigger than that, we may need to hire a CPA or use some sort of professional accounting type application. I don't have any names off the top of my head on that at all. I mean, like I say, every dollar for the individual is perfect. And probably for most small businesses, it would be fine. But again, once you get beyond that, depending upon the type of business and the complexity of what they do, every dollar may not be sufficient. You may have to have something bigger than that.
Sure. And again, we've had a CPA on here that's talked about various things and said, and actually my CPA for our house said, you should get QuickBooks for your personal W-2 just so you can track everything that's going on. It's not that expensive. It allows you to really see how much you're spending on groceries versus everything else. Every dollar's free, so it's a lot easier, but it takes a lot more work if it's not connected to your bank account, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, there are options out there. It's whether we decide to allocate our time, our resources to finding them and using them. A lot of the times we decide to spend our time and money looking at a new refrigerator, a new pair of sneakers or whatever, or where to play golf tomorrow, which is not a bad thing. We have a lot of our team Semper Fi, our athletic program people on this call. But if your fundamentals aren't there, and to get back to the very beginning of this and why we brought you and we're so grateful to have you, the fundamentals of running a business and really living a life that allows you to be a little bit more free starts with finance and making sure you're not owed to people. And if you are, how can I pay it down quickly so I can still get the benefit of the vehicle, of the home, of the fill in the blank without them being able to repossess it? And I don't know if this is true, but I read through my mortgage statement. I don't know if this is on everybody's, but they can call my note at any time if I miss a payment. Even if I don't, they can call my note and say, you owe X, can you pay it today? Well, who's got $100,000 to $400,000? And if you do, good for you, but most likely you don't.
Casey, the genesis of the company that I work for began when that exact situation happened. Dave Ramsey is a real estate guy. He had, several $1 million in real estate when he was in his early 20s. A bank decided that he might be leveraged too much, and this was all borrowed monies. And one of them decided to call the note, just as you mentioned. That triggered others to start calling the note. He couldn't get rid of the real estate fast enough. He couldn't make money fast enough to keep up with it, and it literally overwhelmed him, and he ended up going bankrupt. And bankruptcy is serious business, something that we don't recommend with just very, very, very few exceptions. But he got to that point where he had no other options, and it was all based on having a whole lot of debt and banks starting to call the notes.
That's the idea. That's the concept behind the business model that y'all run is let's be prepared for that and try to stay away from it as much as possible. So we're kind of winding down. I've asked for other questions in closing, but I always like to ask a couple of things before we leave. And the first generic question is, what parting wisdom do you have for our veterans, as both as individuals and maybe as business owners, outside of what maybe you've already talked about?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for your service. Thank you for what you've done for our country, and that's coming from a fellow veteran. So this is deep meaning here to me. Thank you for taking the chance of starting your own business. That's what our country runs on. You wouldn't think so based on what you hear in Washington, but in reality, it's the small business owners that are out there. So that's a really, really big deal. And I think that veterans, they have a leg up. You know, military folks are used to planning worst case, being disciplined. You know, those are two fundamental things that, you know, business owners, if you plan for the worst case, you're probably going to be pleasantly surprised. If you're disciplined and you do the right things over and over again, you're probably going to be pleasantly surprised. So it would, and I don't know what the numbers of veterans businesses, how successful they are, but it wouldn't surprise me if they're better than the average, just because personally I think veterans are better than the average. So thank you again for what you've done and for what you're doing right now.
Yeah, great. And then the last thing I want to ask is, how can we continue to educate ourselves outside of Dave Ramsey Solutions website, social media, et cetera, which is where I get a lot of little tidbits and links to articles and such. But is there any other like books or daily, weekly, monthly subscriptions that our guys and gals can subscribe to better educate themselves?
Yeah, and again, this is going to be a little bit of a plug for our company, but we've got a leadership is one of the topics that we like to talk about in here, and I'll just give you a quick background on that. Dave, when he started the company, was running it when it was real small. He would have meetings with our teammates when we're talking about 30 people in the company at the time, so it's pretty small compared to what it is now. And he would just share, you know, his beliefs on running the company. And it was everything from hiring people to firing people to time management, you know, all of the topics, all the things that leaders deal with, you know, business leaders deal with. And so he started sharing that with the company, and they would have these, you know, once a month sessions for this. And he noticed that, you know, several months into this, that the number of people in the room exceeded the number of employees that he had in the company. And what he came to find out was that, you know, his pastor was showing up, and, you know, other business people were showing up to listen to some of this. So he wrote a book called EntreLeadership, and it's EntreLeadership is a combination of entrepreneur and leadership. It's our playbook, his playbook on how he runs his business. That would be something that would be worth reading. We've got some other authors in the company. You know, Chris Hogan wrote one called Everyday Millionaires, really well worth the time reading that. Ken Coleman, who's another one of our celebrities, wrote a book about finding your strengths, you know, figuring out where your passions are. And that's, I'm talking to business owners, that's probably your passion. But figuring out what those are and helping, you know, how to define those, how to make the most of those. So again, another book there. So we've got several books here within the company that would be of great interest, but I think just reading in general, trying to constantly educate yourself, you know, maybe attending seminars. Again, we don't want to go too far overboard on that with a small business. It's just trying to get started because this is costly to do. But wherever you can, educate yourself, read as much as possible on all these topics that are associated with business. Try to keep your hand on the pulse of the market that you're in. You know, I think that's probably the greatest benefit that you could have just from education, self-education.
Yeah, no better time to be alive than right now to do that. And
Yeah.
live below your means, save your money, don't over leverage yourself, stay disciplined. All of these are great fundamental things that we don't usually follow. We have to remind ourselves of every day. It's a daily ritual and routine, and it's a good recipe for a good soup.
Sure, and you know, great thought there. We all get a little sloppy from time to time, you know, and so we all need a tune-up. You can imagine with the program that I work with, how many times I've actually gone through the lessons, you know, watching the videos or talking to people about it. And every time I go through it, I see something I didn't see before. So, you know, a good tune-up is not a bad thing. Again, it's the reason why we go to the rifle range twice a year, because it'd be nice if you could teach somebody to shoot their weapon once and they'd be good forever. You wouldn't have to waste ammunition on them, but we can't. We have to keep going back because we get into little bad habits. You know, we start getting lazy on things. We start overlooking things. We get bad habits, bad movements, just like a golf swing. And so, you know, you got to go back out and practice a craft. Having a good coach would probably be of great benefit if you can find somebody that you trust to coach you and to listen to what you're doing and give you unbridled, you know, clear advice. You know, their recommendations, their suggestions. That would be a good thing too.
Fantastic. I am fresh out of questions, although I could sit here and ask you a lot more specific things that probably wouldn't apply to a lot of what we're doing. But thank you so much, Colonel, for being here. We really appreciate it. This is a gift and a blessing to us. Is there any way that if we have any of our veterans have questions, they can reach out to you? What I usually say is if that's the case, go through your advisor and we'll connect and make sure that we do it that way to make sure we don't dominate your time. But if you're okay with that, I will make sure that that's available as access through me, and we'll make it an easy funnel point so you don't get bombarded with emails.
Yeah. My phone number, 615-645-6066, direct line to my desk. Email address, eric.smith@daveramsey.com. And, I'll talk to anybody at any time. And, just know that if I can't answer your question here, I'm sure there's somebody here on our team that can. And, and we're not afraid to say we don't know. We're not going to, give you an answer just because we want to. We'll tell you what we believe is right. And if we don't know, we'll tell you we don't know. But sure, anything we can do to help out. That's why we're here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. We appreciate it. Everybody, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the great questions and input. And as mentioned, this is going to be recorded. I will be uploading it and send you the link if you need it. Just shoot your advisor a note and we'll be good to go. Colonel, thank you again. Tell Dave hello and we'll see him next time. We'll do this again.
I sure will. Hey, thank you much. I appreciate it. Pleasure spending some time with y'all. And again, if you have any questions, whatnot, let me know. We're happy to help out.
Thank you, sir. Take care, everybody.